My clock shows 4 o'clock, so we'll just go ahead and get started, and I think people will just continue to join. Good afternoon, everyone. We're so grateful you're joining us today to learn about the Kilgore Gold Exploration Project. My name is Emmy Reed, and I work in the Marketing and Communications Department here at the Greater Yellowstone Coalition. Before we get started, I wanted to run through a few housekeeping notes. Please ensure that your Zoom is on mute to minimize any outside noise during the presentation. At the end of the presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask our presenter questions. You may submit any questions in the chat box during the presentation or after. I will act as moderator and ask those questions out loud during the Q&A portion. Please include your name and email because if we don't have time to get to your question, we will send you a follow-up email answering your question. We also have a feature enabled when anything is typed into the chat box, it just comes to me as the host. So don't worry if you don't see any questions popping up, it is making its way to me. We find that this just helps minimize distractions. And please keep all questions kind and focused on the material from the presentation. Also wanted to just acknowledge that this webinar will be recorded so that we can share it with our supporters who were unable to make it today. And that link will also be sent to you tomorrow via email. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Tom Hallberg. As GYC's Idaho Conservation Organizer, Tom generates support for Idaho projects, including stopping the Kilgore Gold Exploration Project and advocating for wildlife crossings. After finishing a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature, Tom shared his love of the outdoors with others through a collection of guiding and education jobs, from teaching conservation and forest ecology to leading wilderness therapy trips. Drawn from Oregon to the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, the Tetons specifically, more than a decade ago by the promise of easy access splitboarding, he gave up his backpack for a pin after finishing his Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. He landed in journalism, holding a multitude of roles from being a copy editor at the Jackson Hole News and Guide to the managing editor of Backcountry Magazine. He's written about topics from drought impacts in his home of Teton Valley and mental health in mountain towns, to profiles of under-the-radar free skiers and long-form deep dives into the history of snow sports. All right, Tom, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Emmy. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming to learn about an important campaign that GYC has been a part of for a long time, but has been the bulk of my life for the past year or so. Um, it's called the, oh, sorry, my computer is having some trouble. Sorry, Emmy, hang on.
No problem, Tom. There's some folks still coming on anyway, so take your time.
Okay. Emmy, I might need to stop sharing for a second. My computer's trying to restart, and I'm not quite sure why, but I'll be right back.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, hopefully that worked. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, Tom, looks good to us.
All right, so I'm here today to talk about how to stop a gold mine, specifically one in Kilgore, Idaho, which, if you haven't heard of it, that's okay. It's in a very rural, but beautiful part of the state. So First off, Kilgore is a small agricultural town about 50 miles west of Yellowstone National Park. It's right on the Montana-Idaho border in a pretty remote agricultural valley, maybe about an hour and a half north of Idaho Falls, which is the biggest city in this part of the state. It's in the Centennial Mountain foothills, and it is also part of the headwaters of the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer, which is an underground reservoir of water that's really important for pretty much everybody in the eastern part of the state, whether you are in agriculture or whether you just like to drink the water that you get out of your well. So I want to talk first a little bit about what makes Kilgore special. So if you've never been there, imagine a beautiful agricultural valley, grass, sagebrush, big mountains in the background. And there we go. It's full of public lands. Kilgore itself is in the lowlands, lots of ranches, but all the hills around it are public lands that Idahoans use all the time, winter and summer, ATVing, hunting, hiking. Um, Ranchers put their cattle out on those public lands, and so they're a really important area for people around here. They're also full of wildlife and open space. We've talked with partners who see grizzly bears all the time on the area that would be the mine site if it ever became a mine. I see moose, elk, deer, pronghorn pretty much every time I go out. The left-hand picture here is from the lowlands, kind of looking out into the hills around Kilgore. Clean water is a big one. This is West Camas Creek. It's a perennial stream that runs along the base of where the mine would be. And it has Yellowstone cutthroat trout. It has these beautiful willow patches all around it. And the water that comes into the stream goes into that aquifer that I mentioned earlier. And it sustains everything from ranches and cattle to residences and a huge agricultural economy across Idaho. So I mentioned it was rural. This is a picture leaving the town of Kilgore. And when I say town, it's a general store and a few houses and then far-flung ranches. So this is the dirt road that leads up toward where the mine site would be. This hill in the picture right here is where Exelon holds its claims. And so you can kind of see how beautiful it is. It's a really kind of untrammeled area of Idaho, and big old growth forests. And so you can kind of see that it's Idaho as it was 100 years ago, really. So the company that owns the claims in Kilgore is called Exelon Resources. And I want to talk a little bit about how a gold mine would get permitted. But first, I want to talk a little bit about who Exelon is. They are a junior Canadian mining company, which means they're quite small. They buy projects like this, and their general goal is to prove more gold exists in this area than has been shown before. And so they're a pretty small company. They own no active mine claims currently. Everything they own is either a paused mine or a project like Kilgore where they're still trying to show that there's gold. So they're really more speculators than an actual gold mining company, which I'm happy to talk about a little bit later, kind of create some risks for if they ever tried to go forward with this mine. So first off, what is gold exploration? It involves companies going up with a big drilling rig like this one, and they drill and remove rock cores. Exelon wants to drill as deep as 2,000 feet at each one of its drill sites. They don't always have to drill that deeply, but they take rock cores out and they take them to a lab and they crush them up and they put them through the same process that the gold would go through at a mine. And they use that to try to prove that there's enough gold that they would make a profit by building a gold mine there. So there are several steps from where this mine project is right now to actually becoming a mine. So Exelon is at this first step, exploratory drilling. And it just means that they can go and they can pull rock cores like these, which are actually taken from Kilgore in the 2010s. And they use that to try and prove what's called a valid mineral asset, which just basically means that they can show they would make a profit by building a mine there. That's their legal standard for being able to try to move forward with a mine. If they show that they have a valid mineral asset, they can submit what's called a mine plan, which is something that they send to the Forest Service that would have all the details of what a mine would look like, how big it would be, how many people it would employ, how many years it would run, those kinds of things. And after the mine plan, the Forest Service would be in charge of approving or not approving it. And then they would go to the state and the federal government and get a bevy of permits. I don't remember the number, but I believe it's 40 to 50 different permits that they'll need. And that covers everything from clean water to clean air to dust mitigation to hopefully, saving the waterways that come off of the mine. If they get through all of that, then they can begin mining operations. And these mines can run for 15 to 20 years. So it's a pretty long running endeavor once they get started. All of this is governed by something that is from Reconstruction era. The 1872 mining law governs hard rock mineral mining in the US. It is relatively unchanged from the Civil War era. It was the law was made at a time when the gold rush was happening and the federal government was trying to find some way to make mining easy on federal land. And so it basically says that anybody can stake a claim. You can go out, and if there's no claim on public land, you can stake that claim, and then you can look for minerals. And I think that we might think of that as prospectors going out and finding huge gold nuggets. And maybe that was how it was at one point, but now it's companies like Exelon coming in and drilling on public lands to try to show that there's gold there. And because the law is so old, it doesn't really take into account a lot of the things that we would think it should today. So it doesn't have a royalty requirement. So gold mining companies don't need to pay any royalties to state or federal taxpayers. So there's really no benefit to the federal government. It doesn't include environmental safeguards. Those are dictated by things like the Clean Air Act, but the mining law itself includes no environmental safeguards. It puts mining above other public land uses. So today we often think of public lands as mixed use, like sometimes they're logged. We recreate on public lands. Sometimes they are mined, but it puts mining above all other public land uses. So if a company shows that there's valuable minerals on that land, they can turn it into a gold mine, even if that means that we can't go use those public lands as recreators or as ranchers or, whatever your connection is to the land. It also doesn't include any sort of requirements for reclamation to pay for all of the cleanups. So mining companies do submit what's called a reclamation bond, which is an estimate of the money it would cost to clean up a mine when it's done. But often that doesn't cover all the costs, and the mining law doesn't have any mechanism to say like mining companies need to come in and do that later. So it often means that taxpayers are left to cover cleanup costs later. The other big federal law that we think about when thinking about mining projects is NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, which basically just requires the federal government to look at and describe environmental impacts associated with something that's happening on public lands, either logging, road building, mining, etc. It doesn't mean that the agency has to follow the most environmentally beneficial decision. It just means they have to look at it. The thing that we feel is important for everybody here and that we have taken advantage of in the past is that there is a citizen involvement piece. So anytime Exelon wants to re-up its permit, or if they were to submit a mine plan, citizens would have the opportunity to comment on the mine. And I think that during the permitting process for this exploration, we we and our partners helped garner I think 3,000 comments, mostly against the mine. And so that's something that we will look to do every time there's any sort of NEPA review process. So if we're looking at the project itself, so if you look down on the left, here's another inset to show you where it is in Idaho. That big valley that kind of curves away from it is where the Snake River runs through the southern half of the state. And that is where the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer is. The box here shows where Exelon has its claims, and you can see several creeks run off of it, and all of those end up draining into the aquifer at some point, and they support wildlife, agriculture, etc. Looking at these maps a little bit more, the one on the right just shows where Exelon is interested in looking for gold. So those four blobs are where they're focusing their resources right now to look for gold. Over on the left, that shows where they're able to drill. They're permitted to drill in 140 places, and each one of those red dots represents 3 drill sites that they can do. So they can drill up to 420 holes into the hills above Kilgore looking for gold. Not that they have, but they are permitted to right now. So looking at the project itself, they have a 5-year permit that was approved in 2021, but they have not been up there the last 2 summers. As I said, Exelon is a pretty small company. They're financially unstable. And so that's meant that they have not been able to afford going up and drilling the past 2 summers. They are allowed 140 drill sites, 420 holes, and they're allowed to build 10 miles of new roads to reach the new drill sites that they've identified that are not reachable right now. It is a continuation of drilling done by previous companies. So in a lot of these places, a small company will do this kind of exploration and they'll do it for a few years and then they'll sell it to somebody else for a profit and then the cycle continues. And this has been going on here since the 90s. But Exelon's goal and their thought process is that they can drill deeper with newer technologies than other companies have. And so they're, at least what they tell people is that they think they can prove there's more gold because they can drill deeper. Their claims are about 12,000 acres. It's a huge area. It takes all day to walk across and around. And so it would be a gigantic hole in the ground in a really beautiful, untrammeled part of our state. So I don't know how many people have seen a gold mine in person. It's not great looking, but what we think a gold mine would look like in Kilgore would be what's called an open pit heap leach cyanide mine or process. And so let's start with the open pit. So this picture here on the left shows the Round Mountain Mine, which is in Nevada. It's a gigantic gold mine in southern Nevada. Exelon uses it as an example to say what they think this mine might look like. So what the process is they dig down and they take all the rocks out and they crush them up into small pieces and they put them in tailings ponds and they spray them with a solution that chemically pulls the gold from the rocks. It's almost always cyanide, and I'll talk about why. But so that heap leach is where they spray the solution on it and it sits on the rocks for a while and then it pulls the gold out. It's almost always cyanide in a cyanide heap leaching process. And basically what that means is there's a big pile of rocks. They sprinkle a cyanide solution. It's usually a couple percent cyanide into water. And it trickles through and it pulls all the gold off of the rocks. They collect that kind of gold cyanide slurry They pull the gold out and then they reuse the cyanide. What it means is that cyanide can sit in big open ponds that can be 100 acres sometimes. And it just sits there in these sort of toxic lakes for quite a long time. It'd be great if it wasn't cyanide, but it is cyanide because it's the cheapest way to remove gold from what are called low grade deposits. And it basically means that the rock at Kilgore has microscopic small gold flakes throughout it. And the only way to do it is this heap leach process. And cyanide is the cheapest chemical agent that will do it. I believe that Exelon will need to move about 20 tons of rock to get 1 ounce of gold if they were to build a mine here. So that kind of gives you a scale of how much rock needs to be moved to get the gold out of it. So to kind of put a point on why we're worried about cyanide, I want to talk about the Zortman-Landusky mines, which we're up in north central Montana. And it was a cyanide heap leach mine. And cyanide is an asphyxiant, so it's very bad for terrestrial animals. It's bad for aquatic animals. It can change into other toxic chemicals when it hits water. And the tailing ponds leaked at the Zortman-Landusky mine after it had run for 10 years or so. And 50,000 gallons of cyanide solution leaked into the aquifer. And this guy here on the left is showing what his water looked like when it came out of the tap in his house. So that's cyanide, heavy metals, iron, all in the water coming out of people's taps. And obviously, that impacted agriculture. People couldn't drink their water. For years, this has been going on. So this mine, this happened in the mid 90s, and the mine closed in the late 90s, and it has not operated since then, but it's had continued problems for 25 years. There are multiple treatment plants that had to be built to manage the toxic water that comes off of the mine site, and it's cost Montana taxpayers $33 million for cleanup. The company gave a reclamation bond of, I think, $45 million, but cleanup costs far and away outstripped what they thought it would. And so taxpayers are on the hook for any other cleanup that has to happen from now until, the end of time. Those problems were so bad that in Montana, which has a huge history of mining, that voters actually came together to ban cyanide. So they did a citizens initiative. They got it on the ballot and it passed 53 to 47 to ban cyanide in new mines. So any mine that was already using it could continue using it, but any new mine in Montana can't use the same process that would happen at Kilgore. So that means just 10 miles north, this mine couldn't happen. But Idaho doesn't have the same kind of laws in place. And so there's no real way to stop it in the same way that we would be able to in Montana. The other big thing to worry about with water quality is something called acid mine drainage. So if anybody remembers the acid rain that used to happen when we had holes in the ozone layer, it's basically the same thing, but it happens on the ground. So the rocks all across the West contain um, certain chemicals that turn into sulfuric acid when they hit water. It doesn't happen because they're big chunks of rock under the ground and water doesn't percolate through them enough. But when mining companies build a mine and they crush all this rock up, they expose it, they expose those sulfur-bearing minerals to the air and to the water, and it creates sulfuric acid. Often, when it rains or there's flooding or a tailing pond fails, that gets into the water and it turns streams and lakes this sort of bright orange color. And if anybody remembers about 10 years ago, there was a leak at a mine in southwestern Colorado on the Animas River. And I want to talk about that a little bit. It's called the Gold King mine spill. and it was huge. The EPA was trying to clean up an underground gold mine outside of Silverton, Colorado, and they released an underground reservoir of acid mine drainage of this orange, toxic, highly acidic water. And it came down and it went through the Animas River, through Silverton, all the way down to Durango, Colorado. And you can see whole rivers turned orange. And this acid mine drainage contains stuff like cadmium, selenium, other heavy metals, iron, lots of iron, and that can kill fish often quickly, but sometimes slowly. That stuff can build up and make it hard for fish to survive. Anybody who swims in the water can have problems. Cows, other animals that drink the water can die. And so it can devastate whole ecosystems miles from where the mine would be. So, what this could mean in eastern Idaho, because all of eastern Idaho's groundwater is connected, it could mean that contamination from a mine wouldn't really be limited to Kilgore. And that's one of our big concerns. So this map here shows where the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer is. And all of these lines that kind of go down into the left here, that shows where groundwater flows from where the mine is up here all the way to Twin Falls and all throughout Idaho. So it's a distance of approximately 200 miles. And all throughout that area, people have wells, they grow potatoes and hay and run cattle. And cities like Idaho Falls get a lot of their water from the aquifer. And so pretty much all of us in Eastern Idaho use that water in some way. And so if cyanide or acid mine drainage got into the aquifer, it could be a really far-ranging problem. And so we at GYC and with our partners, we worry about, water for agriculture, for our economy. We also just worry about it for anybody who uses this water, either for recreation or for drinking. Building a mine also has huge impacts on wildlife. Um, Looking at those pictures of open pit mines, I think it's safe to say that animals are not going to live in that area, maybe ever again, but definitely not while the mine is in operation. And so anything that lives there now would lose its habitat and be pushed out somewhere else. There's noise and dust pollution. These mines often operate 24/7. Animals don't like lots of loud noises or lights, and so they may be pushed further away than just the immediate place where the mine would be built. There are a lot of impacts to waterways, specifically Yellowstone cutthroat trout, an endemic species of trout to this area, kind of really important species to anglers, to ecosystems all around this part of Idaho. And mines create a lot of dust. So even without some of that like acid mine drainage or cyanide problems, erosion and runoff could really impact streams. It would also push elk, deer, pronghorn, basically any ungulate you can think of off of pretty prime untouched range, and it would push them further from good habitat. And so we could see, wildlife impacts across the spectrum. So we've been doing this a long time, and I inherited a sort of tradition of mine fighting when I came to GYC, and I just want to touch on two successful campaigns that we've been a part of that we hope can kind of influence or inform this work that we're doing now. Most recently was the Yellowstone Gateway Protection Act and the Emigrant Mine. So this was right on the northern boundary of Yellowstone National Park. And you could see it from the park, or would have been able to. But a company wanted to come build a huge industrial scale gold mine. And we, with a bunch of other partners and a group called the Yellowstone Gateway Business Coalition, rallied and worked with legislators on both sides of the aisle. And we were able to get what's called a minerals withdrawal as part of this legislation, the Yellowstone Gateway Protection Act. And we got a permanent protection for these lands, which it basically means that mining, those lands can't be mined from here on out. So again, super successful, something we'd love to replicate here. Going back even further, a very similar mine campaign happened with something called the New World Mine during the Clinton administration. And GYC and partners came together to again stop a large-scale gold mine near Yellowstone National Park that would have changed that area forever. And so I bring this one up mostly just to show we've been doing this a long time, and we hope that our past successes can inform what we're doing here. So there's a slogan that came from the New World Mine and campaign and was used also in the immigrant mine campaign that Yellowstone is more valuable than gold. And we think it is. A lot of our supporters think it is, and we hope that we can continue to prove that with this campaign. So how we're doing that is with a group called the Clean Kilgore Coalition. We do a lot of grassroots work. It's a group mostly of nonprofits, but we also have brought in some ranchers and archaeologists and individuals across Idaho who are interested in protecting this land. So this is actually a couple of our partners, and then a former GYC staffer walking in the area where the mine claims are. So you can kind of see how beautiful it is, how untouched it is. So the Clean Kilgore Coalition is a group of outdoor recreationists, families, and conservationists, and we're committed to protecting Eastern Idaho's waters, lands, and way of life. I said that this exploration has been happening since probably the mid 90s. We have been involved directly since 2019. So GYC got involved because a Canadian company called Otis Gold started poking around and trying to get permits. And in 2019, I'm going to talk about this first. In 2019, we sued when they were approved for a permit. Our partner, Idaho Conservation League, and our law firm, Advocates for the West, we sued over a lack of protections for whitebark pines and Yellowstone cutthroat trout. That was successful. So the environmental analysis, which happened through the NEPA process, that was overturned from the lawsuit, and the company and the Forest Service had to rewrite it to provide more protection specifically for whitebarks and trout. They were approved in 2021, and we sued again on the same grounds, but we were unsuccessful. The judge said that the changes that had been made satisfied protecting those species well enough, at least for exploration activities. So we created the Clean Kilgore Coalition, and a lot of my work in the last year has been growing this group, giving presentations like this, getting people involved. And we have a pretty large list of partners who are helping in some capacity on this. It's us, the Idaho Conservation League, who's been in it since the beginning, Idaho Rivers United, Conservation Voters for Idaho, the Sierra Club, several smaller regional groups, the Henry Stork Wildlife Alliance and the Friends of Camas National Wildlife Refuge, Mountain West Recreation Alliance, and then the National Parks Conservation Association, which helped out on the immigrant mine campaign as well. So they're very well versed in doing this kind of work. So what we're doing is presentations like this to grow the coalition. We'd really like to add individuals across the country and in Idaho and other groups like GYC, ranchers. We want to show that there's widespread opposition to this. I hear it talking to people, but we want to have a place where we can show exactly how much opposition there is. As part of that, we watchdog exploration activities. What that really means is just making sure that Exelon lives up to its permits. So it's required to do a certain amount of monitoring. It has to plug drill holes with concrete. So our job is to make sure that that's happening. When the NEPA process comes up again, when Exelon needs to reapply for a permit, which likely will happen in 2027, we will work on those permitting processes. We'll sue if we need to. We'll tell all of you to get involved and to comment. And then the last thing is we want to find a permanent solution to take mining away, which I mentioned earlier. A minerals withdrawal is really the only thing that can do that. It's an act of Congress. And so we are working slowly toward doing that. So if you're here, hopefully you're interested in getting involved. You can sign up for our email list. That's the easiest way to get involved. That's where we tell people about comment periods, about events. So that's a great way for you to stay involved and stay up on, everything that's happening in our campaign. Really appreciate it if you tell all your friends. Grassroots organizing is kind of it's a word of mouth type thing, and I can't talk to everybody who needs to be involved in this. So anybody who's interested or anybody that you think would be interested, tell them about it. If you live in Idaho and you want to tell me about why you like Kilgore or you want to go out there and see it for yourself, you can send me an email. I go out there a lot. I'd like to take people out there this summer. So yeah, reach out and we can see how you can get involved. If you don't live in Idaho, but you want to learn more, our website is protectkilgore.org. We have a lot of information there about the campaign, about the mine, and we have a cool new toolkit that our communication staff put together where we have a self-guided tour. So if you wanted to go out there, you could go see all of the places in Kilgore kind of on your own. And we have a place where if you have been out there, you can tell us why you think it's important. So definitely check that out. I think it's a cool way to sort of get connected, even if, there isn't a comment period coming up. I wanted to just let you guys read these for a second. It can sometimes feel like, conservation groups are the ones that are doing this work, but even in rural Idaho, we have farmers and ranchers and landowners who are very much opposed to this mine happening. They see a threat to their livelihood and to their way of life, and they are very much on our side in this fight. And even though sometimes they find it surprising that we're all on the same side. This is our website again, protectkilgore.org. So if you want to go to there again, it's, you can learn a lot about this type of mining, about this project in general, and then you can learn about any other events. And with that, we can open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. Again, if you have any questions, please drop that in the chat. Please also include your name and email so that if we run out of time and don't get to your question, Tom can follow up with you afterwards. All right, Tom, first question. Can you talk a bit about how long does it take from exploratory drilling to operating mine?
Sure. Um, it's honestly different with every mine. Several years. So these exploratory permits are 5 years. And Exelon wouldn't have to wait 5 years to submit a mine plan, but it's in their benefit to do that. So the NEPA process can take years. I'll use an example. There's another gold mine that just got permitted in Idaho called the Stibnite Gold Mine. That's in central Idaho on the South Fork of the Salmon River. And they've been exploring it it's a historical mining district, but it probably took that company 6 or 7 years to go from we've decided we want to reopen this mine to getting their permits, which actually happened earlier this year. And that's still going through legal battles. Idaho Conservation League and Idaho Rivers United, our partners in this, are opposed to that mine as well. And they're currently in litigation on some of the permits, so it could be even longer, but several years basically from like when they decide they want to build the mine to even having a mine.
Got it. Thank you. Let's see. How do you know cyanide will be used at Kilgore?
As I said earlier, it's really the only economically viable thing to do this. You have to use, because the rock is so low grade, you have to use some kind of leaching agent. You have to do this open pit heap leach process, and cyanide is the cheapest way to do it right now. There are companies trying to make other chemical agents that would work that would maybe be less toxic, but none of them have proven to be cheaper or better. Sometimes they don't pull as much gold off of the rocks, and so it there just really isn't another option.
Got it. Thank you. Next question. Has there been any push for legislation in Idaho that would prohibit cyanide mining specifically and other types of harmful mining, similar to the legislation passed in Montana?
Not in a meaningful way. I hear from people, I've heard from the county commissioners in Clark County where this would be, that they would love to see that. I've heard from people across eastern Idaho that they would love to see a cyanide ban. It's really hard. GYC does not have the ground game and the experience to do a statewide ballot initiative. It would just require a huge amount of money and a huge amount of people. And I think the reason that the Zortman-Landusky mine resulted in a a ban was because those two things were really close together. Like Zortman-Landusky happened, it was really bad. People's taps were running orange, and it was this galvanizing moment, and then that led to it. And I I hate to say it, but I think we would need something like that in Idaho, and I don't want to see that. So it seems somewhat impossible to get enough people to be knowledgeable enough and care about it to make that happen.
Got it. Thank you. Tom, we had a request. Could you go back to the slide with all of the coalition members, please?
And
Perfect. Thank you. And we can just, yeah, leave that up for a bit. Whoops. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Question about the aquifer. Is it overstating the potential problem by saying the whole aquifer is at risk? Excuse me, contamination migrates slowly generally.
yes, I hope I didn't imply that like it would be a problem all the way to Twin Falls. I think how I would phrase it is when cyanide or acid mine drainage drains into an aquifer, it plumes out in kind of a concentric circle fashion. It does move slowly, and it's hard to say exactly what the problem would be. There is a potential that there's so much water down there that with a small scale leak, it may not be a problem except for people directly in Kilgore. But, you know, like on the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation with Zortman, if you pump 50,000 gallons of cyanide solution and acid mine drainage into the aquifer at one time, a large scale leak like that could have an impact that spreads far larger than a smaller leak. And so it certainly would depend on the scope of the leak and then how quickly, the hydrodynamics of the aquifer work. And I've talked to a few people who said it would be really difficult to quantify that unless it actually happened, which is kind of a not a great situation to be in.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Let's see. Can you speak a bit more about the mining company and how likely it is to be able to build a mine and follow through on a cleanup?
Yeah. As I said, Exelon's really small, so they own four exploration projects around the world, one in Germany, one in Peru. They just had one in Mexico, I think that they sold. but they're so financially unstable that they actually couldn't pay their drilling operators from the last time they were up in Idaho. So they don't have a lot of extra money. Um, if they were able to get enough capital to build a mine, I believe they'd get the bare minimum for a reclamation bond. And so I wouldn't say that they are the type of company with any kind of track record for cleaning up a mine like this. And so they could sell it to another mining company, but the company that owns it right now has really no track record of having enough money to cover any sort of ecological damage that they would cause.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Tom. How close is the project area to the Nez Perce Trail, and are the Nez Perce and or the Nez Perce Trail Association involved or concerned about this project?
Very close to the Nez Perce Trail. So the Nez Perce Trail runs right through, not maybe right through the town of Kilgore, but very, very close. We have not reached out to the Nez Perce yet. It is on my list of things to do. We're currently trying to talk to the Shoshone-Bannock tribes, which are the tribes in this part of eastern Idaho whose ancestral homelands would have been on that land. So the Nez Perce did move through, and I think it will be important to talk to them and get them involved. But I'm hoping to start with working with the Shoshone-Bannock since it is their ancestral homelands.
Great, thanks, Tom. Um, would you be able to speak at all to the executive order Trump signed a few days ago, fast tracking anything to do with mining? Does not sound good.
It's not. Um, I can talk about it a little bit. I mean, basically what it does is it just kind of puts a point home on this idea that mining is above all other uses on public land. So it sort of hammers home this idea that the 1872 mining law already has on the books that mining is sort of more important than any other use of public lands. I don't know that it changes much for us in this project right now, just because they haven't submitted a mine plan yet. I know gold's on the list of things from that executive order. It's basically any mineral you could find in the ground. It says that, that should be a high priority. But the government also has lists of other critical minerals, and gold is not generally on those lists. So I don't know that it changes anything right now. It could make it more difficult to stop were Exelon to submit a mine plan.
Got it, thanks. Um, in the similar vein, um, or maybe, sorry, actually, let's go to, would you talk about Kilgore being critical to a grizzly migration corridor?
I can, yeah. So without going too far into the grizzly bear realm, there are distinct populations of grizzly bears, Yellowstone, Glacier, and there are the Bitterroot Range, for instance, which is just to the west of where Kilgore is. Those populations of grizzly bears don't necessarily, they have not connected, which is a goal of GYCs and of wildlife managers to connect those distinct populations for better genetic diversity. The centennials are part of a critical migration path between Yellowstone and the Bitterroots and the Frank Church Wilderness, which is in the middle of Idaho. And they're basically that connective tissue for bears to move west into some of those areas like the Bitterroots. And Kilgore is a little bit off of like the main crest of the Centennials, but it's still really important grizzly bear habitat. And again, like hunters that we talk to see grizzly bears every year when they're out there hunting. And so it's definitely an area where bears are.
Thanks, Tom. Are there a lot of camping opportunities in the area?
Yes. Um, I'd say that's what Kilgore is most known for in eastern Idaho. So Idaho Falls, like I said, is an hour and a half away. Kilgore is probably some of the easiest access camping and recreation for people in Idaho Falls. And there are a couple of actual campgrounds, and then there are lots of dispersed camping areas all around Kilgore. And we talk to people who are their families have been going there for generations to go camp up there. So it's definitely a big draw for people, and there's a lot of camping opportunities.
Great. Another question, should we reach out to our Idaho representatives about this mine?
Yes. Um, we have not officially like pushed people to reach out to their representatives because it can be more powerful when everybody does it at once, when we're kind of ready to ask them for something. But if you feel compelled, I think that we're talking to Idaho representatives or their offices about the mine. They know it's out there. They know we're doing this work. So if you want to, especially if you would also be willing to do it later when we ask again, I don't think it would hurt for, especially Mike Simpson. He's probably the most public lands friendly of Idaho's legislators. I don't think it would hurt for people to start reaching out so they're kind of primed and they know that people are thinking about this.
Great. Tom, could you touch again on the current status of the exploration activities? You said a permit request is expected in a couple of years.
Yes. So their current permit was approved in 2021 and it runs in like late 2021, October or November of that year. And so they're permitted for 5 summers of drilling. So that would end November 2026. So they're permitted to be up there this year and then the following summer. When that happened or after that permit is through, they would either need to submit a mine plan, which is would sort of trigger a different stage of this campaign, or they would need to reapply for another 5-year drilling permit. Likely that would be in 2027 just because of like how long the applications take. But I'm sort of looking at 2027 as the year when something would happen, either a mine plan or a new drilling permit. And then again, that's where people would be able to get involved.
Great. Thanks, Tom. I think we've hit all of our questions. So if anyone has any other questions that come up, please send us an email. I can get it over to Tom if you respond to any emails I've sent, and we can make sure to touch base on whatever concerns you most about this mine. And I really want to extend our gratitude to you all for joining us today. You make our work possible, and we appreciate how much you care about this ecosystem. If you would like to support our work, there will be a donation link in tomorrow's email. We also have 2 more webinars coming up in the next several weeks. One is about our grizzly bear conflict prevention work, and the other is about our fence removal and modification work to help support wildlife migration and movement. And we'd love to see you there. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.